Three servers pulled out their phones, started recording, and Anthony Voss, the man Layla had defended to her own father for 4 years, had no idea he was ending his own career in real time. He grabbed a chair and threw it against the wall, glass shattered everywhere. Her father just stood there, 67 years old, arms at his sides, watching. He didn't yell, didn't fight back, didn't even flinch. And Layla? She stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, watching her husband scream at her father. And for the first time in 4 years, she felt something she hadn't expected. Relief. The kind that only comes after you've already lost everything worth losing. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's start from the beginning, because you need to understand how they got here. How a woman who chose the wrong man over her own family finally watched that choice explode in front of her. Her name is Layla Kincaid, 34 years old, and until that night, she was the partner of Anthony Voss, celebrity chef, social media darling, and the man who spent 4 years trying to destroy her father's restaurant while she made excuses for him. Her father, Edmund, built Kincaid's 32 years ago, 1 Michelin star, 32 years of reputation, the kind of place where reservations book out 3 months in advance, and critics use words like legacy and institution. Anthony hated that he'd never measure up, hated that every review of his restaurant mentioned her father's name. And that night, drunk and desperate, he finally showed the world exactly who he was. 12 million people would watch this video by morning, but none of them knew what Layla knew. None of them saw what she saw. This is her story. Before we dive in, tell us in the comments which city you're watching from. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10 at the end. Now, let's continue. 4 years earlier, Layla Kincaid was 30 years old and exactly where she'd always expected to be, managing her father's restaurant in San Francisco's Nob Hill neighborhood. Kincaid's had been open since 1992. Edmund had started it the year after Layla's mother died, breast cancer, diagnosed too late, gone within 8 months. Layla was 12 when it happened, old enough to understand death, too young to understand grief. She remembered the last meal her mother ever made, a simple roast chicken with herbs from the windowsill garden. Her mother's hands, already thin from the illness, still steady as she basted the skin. Her father watching from the doorway, trying not to cry. 2 weeks later, she was gone. The restaurant became Edmund's therapy, his tribute, his reason to keep going. He named it simply Kincaid's. No fancy French words, no trendy concepts, just his name on the door and his wife's recipes on the menu. Classic American fine dining with hints of her mother's southern roots. The woman had grown up in Charleston, and her influence lived in every sauce, every seasoning, every dish that Edmund had learned to make by watching her hands move in their tiny apartment kitchen. The duck breast with cherry reduction, her mother's creation. The bourbon pecan pie, her mother's grandmother's recipe. The way Edmund folded fresh herbs into butter at the last second, a technique she'd taught him on their 3rd date. Every dish was a love letter. Every service was a memorial. The Michelin star came in 2006. 1 star. Edmund never chased the 2nd. When people asked why, he'd shrug. 1 honest star is worth more than 2 bought ones. Layla never fully understood what he meant until much later. She'd grown up in that kitchen, learned to walk between prep stations, did her homework at the bar while her father worked the line, started bussing tables at 14, serving at 18, managing by 25. Her father never remarried, never even dated as far as she knew. The restaurant was her wife now, the staff was his family, and Layla was everything. By 30, she knew every supplier by first name, every recipe by heart, every regular customer's preferred table and drink order.
She knew which line cooks were struggling with personal problems, which servers were saving for college, which dishwashers had dreams of becoming chefs themselves. She was the daughter of the king, but she never wanted the crown. What happened next would change everything. She met Anthony Voss at a charity gala in the Marina District. It was one of those events where San Francisco's culinary elite gathered to write checks and be photographed writing checks. Layla hated these things, the air kisses, the humble brags, the constant one-upsmanship disguised as conversation. But her father had asked her to represent Kincaid's. He was tired. His back hurt. He wanted to stay home and watch the Giants game. So she went. Anthony found her hiding near the bar, nursing a glass of wine she didn't really want, counting the minutes until she could leave without being rude. He was handsome. That was the first thing she noticed. Dark hair, sharp jaw, the kind of smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. He was wearing a chef's coat, unusual for these events where most people dressed in suits, and she later learned he'd done it on purpose. Branding, he called it. He introduced himself like he was apologizing. "I'm Anthony. I run a little place in Soma. You've probably never heard of it." She had heard of it, actually. Voss and Vine, the trendy new spot that food bloggers couldn't stop photographing. Modern American cuisine with Asian influences and a lot of dry ice. Not her style, but she didn't say that. What she said was, "I'm Layla. My father runs Kincaid's." His eyes went wide. Not fake wide, genuine wide. "Edmund Kincaid," he said. "The Edmund Kincaid? I've eaten there probably 15 times. Your father's a legend. I'm just a guy trying not to ruin a good piece of fish." She laughed. It felt good to laugh. They talked for 2 hours. He was funny, self-deprecating. He asked about her life, her interests, her dreams, not just her father's restaurant. He seemed genuinely curious about who she was beyond the Kincaid name. When she mentioned she'd always wanted to travel to Japan, he pulled out his phone and showed her pictures from his trip to Tokyo. The fish markets, the tiny ramen shops, the precision of the sushi chefs he'd observed. He told her about his own background, growing up poor in Sacramento, working his way through culinary school on student loans and dishwashing jobs, building Voss and Vine from nothing, a self-made man, the American dream in a chef's coat. He asked about her mother. Most people avoided the subject. Death made them uncomfortable. But Anthony leaned in, listened carefully, asked follow-up questions. When Layla mentioned the duck breast recipe, he said, "That's beautiful. Cooking as memory, cooking as love. That's what this industry should be about." She felt seen, understood, special. He had passion, that was obvious, and ambition and charm. What he didn't have, what Layla wouldn't see until much later, was integrity. At the end of the night, he asked for her number. She gave it to him. Their first date was at a tiny Vietnamese restaurant in the Tenderloin. He'd said he wanted to show her his favorite pho in the city. No pretense, no Instagram moments, just good food. He picked her up in a used Honda, not the sports car she'd expected. He'd laughed about it. "I put all my money into the restaurant. The car can wait." She'd found that charming, humble, real. He didn't know it yet, but she was already falling. Her father's face when she mentioned Anthony's name the next morning told her everything she needed to know. Edmund didn't say anything negative. He never did. He just nodded slowly, sipped his coffee, and said, "Be careful with that one. He's hungry, and hungry men don't always know when to stop eating." Layla dismissed it as overprotective father syndrome. Edmund didn't like anyone she dated. He had impossibly high standards for food, for people, for everything. She told herself he'd come around once he got to know Anthony. He never did. 8 months later, Layla moved in with Anthony. They didn't get married. Anthony had opinions about marriage. He called it an outdated institution, a piece of paper that didn't define love. Layla wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that what they had was more evolved, more modern, more real than a legal contract.
Looking back, she'd realized the truth. He never intended to commit, not fully, not legally. He wanted the benefits of a partner without any of the obligations. But at the time, she was in love, or what she thought was love. She left Kincaid's to help Anthony run Voss and Vine. Her father said nothing when she told him, just hugged her at the restaurant door, held her a little longer than usual, and let her go. He didn't say, "Be careful." He didn't say, "I told you so." His silence said everything. But she had no idea what was waiting for her. The first year was good, or good enough. Layla brought order to the chaos of Voss and Vine. The restaurant was popular but poorly managed. Anthony had passion and talent, but no head for logistics. Inventory was a mess. Staff turnover was brutal. Suppliers were unreliable. She fixed it, quietly, efficiently, the way she'd been trained to fix things at Kincaid's. Within 6 months, food costs were down 15%. Staff retention had doubled. The kitchen ran like clockwork instead of chaos. Anthony took the credit. At every interview, every profile, every industry event, "I really streamlined operations this year. It's about systems, discipline." She told herself she didn't mind. But somewhere in that first year, she started noticing things. The way he'd interrupt her in meetings, the way he'd take her ideas and present them as his own, the way he introduced her at industry events, not as his partner, not as the operations director, but my girlfriend, like she was an accessory, a trophy. There was a moment at a food festival in Napa. Layla was explaining to a supplier how she'd restructured their inventory management system. Anthony appeared out of nowhere, slid his arm around her waist, and said, "She's learning so much working with me. It's cute watching her grow." Learning. Cute. Like she hadn't been running restaurants since before he'd opened his first food truck. The supplier glanced between them, clearly uncomfortable. Layla smiled through it. What else could she do? She brought it up once, gently. She said she felt invisible sometimes, that she wanted more recognition for her contributions. He laughed. Not a mean laugh, a dismissive one. "Babe," he said, "nobody cares about operations. They care about the food. They care about the chef. That's just how this industry works. You know that." She did know that. She'd grown up in it. But her father had never made her feel invisible. Her father had always said, "The chef gets the glory, but the team gets the win. Nobody succeeds alone." Anthony succeeded alone, at least in his own mind. Then there were the parties. Anthony loved to entertain, loved having people over, industry people, media people, anyone who might be useful. Layla became the hostess, the caterer, the cleaner. She'd spend days preparing, and he'd spend the evening accepting compliments. "Great spread, Anthony. You really outdid yourself." He never corrected them, never said, "Actually, Layla made everything," never acknowledged her presence beyond refilling drinks and clearing plates. One night, after a particularly exhausting event, she asked, "Do you even see me anymore?" He looked up from his phone, confused. "What are you talking about? You're right here." That wasn't what she meant, but explaining felt impossible. What Layla didn't know was that the real problems hadn't even started yet. By year 2, the comparisons began. Every review of Voss and Vine, every profile of Anthony, every interview, they all mentioned Edmund Kincaid. Anthony Voss shows promise, though he hasn't yet reached the level of San Francisco institutions like Kincaid's. Voss and Vine is innovative but lacks the soul that defines Edmund Kincaid's legendary establishment. If Anthony Voss wants to be taken seriously, he'll need to step out of the considerable shadow cast by his partner's father.
Anthony pretended not to care, but Layla saw the way his jaw tightened when he read the reviews, the way he'd go quiet for hours afterwards, the way he started drinking more. Just a glass or two at first, then a bottle, then more.
The first time he threw something, it was a wine glass. He'd just read a review that called Kincaid's the gold standard and Voss and Vine a silver medal at best. The glass shattered against the kitchen wall. Layla jumped. He apologized immediately, said it was the stress, said it wouldn't happen again. It happened again and again. Never at her, always at walls, at objects, at things that couldn't fight back. But the rage was building. She could feel it like pressure before a storm. He never yelled at her, not directly, but he found ways to make her feel responsible. Maybe if your father wasn't so beloved, I could actually get a fair shot. Maybe if you'd learned more about modern cuisine instead of that traditional stuff. Maybe if people didn't automatically compare every chef in this city to Edmund fucking Kincaid. He'd always apologize afterward, say he was stressed, say he didn't mean it, say he loved her. And she'd believe him, because believing him was easier than facing the alternative. The visits to her father became less frequent. Every time she went to Kincaid's, Anthony would sulk for days. Every time she praised her father's cooking, Anthony would find something to criticize. Eventually, it was easier to just not go. Edmund noticed. He never said anything, never pressured, never guilted, but she could see the hurt in his eyes when weeks passed without a visit, when she missed Sunday dinners they'd shared for 30 years, when the distance between them grew wider with every passing month. She was choosing Anthony over her father. She knew it. She hated herself for it, but she didn't know how to stop. The worst part, this was only the beginning. Layla wanted a baby. She'd wanted one for years, had imagined a child running through the restaurant the way she once had, learning to cook at their grandfather's side, carrying on the family legacy. A little girl with Edmund's eyes, a little boy with her mother's laugh. She'd always assumed it would happen naturally, fall in love, get married, have children, the normal progression of a normal life. But nothing about her life with Anthony was normal anymore.
She brought it up on her 32nd birthday. They'd been together 3 years. She wasn't getting younger. The timeline mattered. They were at dinner, a nice restaurant, not his, not her father's, neutral territory. She'd planned what she was going to say, rehearsed it in the mirror. "I want to start trying," she said, "for a baby." Anthony set down his fork, took a sip of wine, looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Then he said, "After the star." The Michelin star. His obsession, the validation he craved more than anything, more than success, more than money, more than her. He explained it like it made perfect sense. He couldn't be distracted right now. The restaurant needed his complete focus. A baby would derail everything they'd built. Once they had the star, once his legacy was secured, then they could talk about a family. She wanted to argue, wanted to point out that her father had raised her while running a restaurant, that plenty of chefs had children, that she was 32 years old and biology didn't care about Michelin stars. But she saw the look in his eyes, the desperation, the hunger her father had warned her about. She said, okay, she'd wait. A year passed. She brought it up again. Same answer, after the star. Another year, same conversation, same deflection. By the time she turned 34, she'd stopped asking. The answer was always the same. The star was always more important. She started noticing pregnant women everywhere, in restaurants, on the streets, at the grocery store. She'd watch them absently touch their bellies, and something inside her would ache. She mentioned it to Anthony once, casually, pointing at a couple with a newborn at a nearby table. He didn't even look up from his phone. Kids are exhausting. We'd never have time for anything. Like it was a joint decision, like he had been making the choice for both of them for 3 years. A year turned into 2, then 3, then 4. The star never came.
and neither did the baby. He thought he'd won. He was wrong. Margot Sinclair entered the picture in year 3.
She was a food critic for a mid-tier San Francisco publication. Not the Chronicle, not the big leagues, but ambitious enough to claw her way up. 34 years old, sharp features, sharper tongue. The kind of woman who knew exactly what she wanted and didn't care who she stepped on to get it. She'd built her career on being controversial. Her reviews were cutting, sometimes cruel. She'd once described a Michelin-starred chef's signature dish as something my cat would reject. The chef had retired 6 months later. Margot had framed the headline. Layla met her once, briefly, at a media event. Something about the way Margot looked at Anthony made Layla's stomach turn. It wasn't admiration. It was hunger, recognition, like recognizing like. She dismissed it. Paranoia, insecurity, her own issues. But the affair had already started. It began at a private tasting Anthony had organized for select media. Margot stayed late. Everyone else left. Layla was at home, waiting for a husband who wouldn't arrive until 3 a.m. Anthony was careful at first. Late nights he attributed to menu development. Unexplained phone calls, he said, were from suppliers. Distant moods he blamed on stress. He'd come home smelling different. Not perfume, nothing that obvious, just different. Like he'd showered somewhere else, used someone else's soap. Layla noticed. Of course she noticed. She'd spent her whole life reading people. It was part of managing a restaurant. But she didn't want to see. So she didn't. She found a receipt once. A hotel. Downtown. The date matched a night he said he was doing inventory. She didn't confront him. She put the receipt back in his wallet and pretended she'd never seen it. That was the night she stopped sleeping well. The night the dreams started. Nightmares where she was trapped in a burning building and couldn't find the exit. She didn't know it yet, but someone else was watching. What she couldn't ignore were Margot's reviews. They started appearing in late autumn, glowing pieces about Voss and Vine, praising Anthony's vision, his innovation, his bold departure from San Francisco's stuffy fine dining establishment. And then, subtly at first, criticisms of Kincaid's. Edmund Kincaid's menu feels frozen in time, comforting for some, but increasingly irrelevant in a city that demands evolution. While Kincaid's trades on nostalgia, younger chefs like Anthony Voss are pushing the boundaries of what American cuisine can be. One wonders how long a single Michelin star can sustain a restaurant that refuses to innovate. Edmund never mentioned the reviews, but Layla saw them, felt them like paper cuts. Her father's restaurant, her mother's legacy, being dismissed as irrelevant, outdated, past its prime. And she was living with the man who was benefiting from every word. That decision would cost him everything. Howard Fleiss had been reviewing restaurants before Layla was born. 62 years old, James Beard Award winner, the kind of critic whose opinion could make or break a career. He'd written for the New York Times, the Washington Post, and now ran his own influential newsletter with 400,000 subscribers. In an industry full of hot takes and Instagram influencers, Howard was old school. He believed in craft, in integrity, in telling the truth even when it was inconvenient. He had given Edmund Kincaid his first major positive review in 1994, and they'd maintained a quiet mutual respect ever since. Not friends. Howard didn't believe critics and chefs should be friends, but something like professional admiration. Howard didn't like Margot Sinclair. He had made that clear in industry circles, thought she was too cozy with certain chefs, too willing to let personal relationships influence professional opinions. He'd mentioned it at a journalism conference once. The moment you start sleeping with the people you review, you stop being a critic and start being a publicist. Someone had told Margot about the comment. She'd never forgiven him.
So, when Howard noticed the pattern in her reviews, the consistent praise for Voss and Vine, the consistent criticism of Kincaid's, he got curious. He made a reservation at Kincaid's for a Friday evening in February. Didn't tell anyone, just showed up, sat in a corner booth, and ordered the tasting menu. What he didn't know was that Margot had made a reservation for the same night. Anthony had suggested it, a chance for her to gather more ammunition against Edmund. Write about the declining quality, the tired presentations, the restaurant living on borrowed time. Howard noticed her across the room. She didn't notice him. They ordered the same dish, Edmund's signature, pan-seared duck breast with cherry reduction and roasted root vegetables, a dish that had been on the menu for 20 years, a dish that Layla's mother had created. Howard ate slowly, deliberately, taking notes between bites. Margot ate quickly, distracted, checking her phone between courses. Howard's review came out 3 days later. It was a love letter. In an era of gimmicks and Instagram aesthetics, Edmund Kincaid reminds us what cooking is actually about: soul. His duck breast, unchanged in 20 years, is unchanged because perfection doesn't require innovation. It requires consistency. It requires care. It requires love. Kincaid's isn't frozen in time, it's timeless, and San Francisco is lucky to have it. The review went viral, shared thousands of times, quoted in other publications, a reminder that old-school excellence still mattered. And then Howard added a note that seemed almost casual. Curiously, I noticed a fellow critic dining at Kincaid's that same evening. I'll be interested to compare our impressions when her review publishes. Margot's review came out 2 days later. She'd written it before reading Howard's piece. She couldn't have known. She called the duck overdone, the presentation dated, the restaurant coasting on faded glory. The internet did the math. Someone had photographed Margot at Kincaid's that night, posted the picture with the timestamp. Same night as Howard, same restaurant, same dish. Opposite conclusions. The accusations came fast. Bias, corruption, personal vendetta. Twitter exploded. Reddit threads appeared. Someone dug up the connection between Margot and Anthony. Photos of them at events, standing too close, laughing too intimately.
Her editor called her in for a meeting, 2 hours behind closed doors. By the end of the week, her column was suspended pending investigation. By the end of the month, she was gone. The official statement called it a mutual parting. Everyone knew the truth. Anthony stopped returning her calls. She'd served her purpose. She was a liability now. Margot Sinclair's career was over, and she had only herself to blame. But Anthony wasn't done, not by a long shot. The sabotage happened in April. Anthony had learned through Margot in the final weeks before he'd discarded her that Michelin inspectors were planning to visit Kincaid's, a specific date, a specific service, the kind of insider information that could make or break a restaurant's chances. For weeks he'd been stewing over Howard's review. The praise for Edmund had felt like a personal attack. The viral success of the piece had driven even more customers to Kincaid's, while Voss and Vine's reservations remained flat. And now Edmund might get a second star. The recognition that Anthony had been chasing for years, the validation that would finally prove he was better than his girlfriend's father, handed to a man he considered a dinosaur. He couldn't let that happen. Craig Lumley had worked at Kincaid's for 3 years before Edmund fired him, caught stealing, expensive ingredients disappearing from the walk-in, receipts that didn't match inventory, Wagyu beef, white truffle, saffron, thousands of dollars over 6 months. Edmund had given him a chance to explain, sat him down in the office, door closed, and asked directly, "Is there something going on I should know about?" Craig lied. Looked Edmund in the eye and lied. Edmund had let him go. No police, no public accusations, just a quiet termination and a reference that said only the dates of employment.
It was more mercy than Craig deserved. He didn't see it that way. He'd bounced around the San Francisco restaurant scene since then, never lasting long anywhere. His reputation had preceded him. Industry people talked, and word got around. Bitter, convinced that Edmund had ruined his career, that the firing had been personal, that he'd been singled out for something every kitchen did.
Anthony found him at a dive bar in the Tenderloin, recognized him from his research. He'd been looking for anyone with a grudge against Edmund, and Craig's name had come up more than once. He bought him a drink, then another, listened sympathetically to Craig's sob story about being blackballed by the industry elite. Then he made his offer. $15,000. Cash. Untraceable. All Craig had to do was get a job at Kincaid's. Edmund was always hiring, always giving second chances, and sabotage the service on the night of the Michelin inspection. Nothing too obvious, just small mistakes. Oversalted sauces. Timing on the duck was thrown off, sent out before the sauce was ready. The dessert soufflé was switched from sugar to salt at the last moment. The kitchen was in chaos. Edmund knew something was wrong. The flow was off. The energy was bad. But he couldn't figure out what. He'd been doing this for 32 years. He could feel when a service was going sideways. 3 tables complained. The chef de cuisine sent back 2 dishes. Edmund personally apologized to a foretop who'd waited 40 minutes for their entrees. But the guests that night weren't Michelin inspectors. The reservation Anthony had been told about, the specific date, the specific table, was wrong. Margot's information had been outdated. The real inspection had been moved. The people Craig had sabotaged were a private party, a tech investor testing the restaurant before hosting a major corporate event there. The investor walked away. The event went elsewhere. Kincaid's lost a $50,000 booking.
But the Michelin star was never in danger. The inspectors wouldn't come for another 2 months. Anthony had been played, or Margot had been wrong. Either way, the sabotage had hit the wrong target. Craig was discovered 3 days later. A line cook noticed him tampering with the sauce, adding something from a small container he shouldn't have had. She reported it to the sous chef. The sous chef told Edmund. Edmund confronted him quietly, privately, in his office, door closed. The same office where he'd given Craig his second chance just weeks before. Craig confessed to the sabotage, but he wouldn't say who'd paid him, claimed it was anonymous. Cash in an envelope slipped under his door, no names, no faces. It was a lie and they both knew it, but without proof there was nothing Edmund could do. He let Craig go, again, this time without the gentle reference. But that night, for the first time in years, Edmund did something he'd been avoiding for months. He called his daughter. "We need to talk," he said, "in person. It's important." They met at Kincaid's the next afternoon, before service. The dining room was empty. Sunlight streamed through the windows, catching the dust motes floating in the air. Edmund looked older than Layla remembered. Tired, the lines around his eyes deeper, his shoulders carrying weight that hadn't been there a year ago. He'd set up a table for 2 near the kitchen, the same table where she'd done her homework as a child, where she'd eaten her first solid food, where her mother had once spilled an entire bottle of wine and laughed until she cried. He'd made coffee, her favorite, dark roast, a splash of cream. He remembered. He always remembered. For a long moment they just sat together, father and daughter, the silence of 2 people who'd once known how to talk and had forgotten somewhere along the way. Then Edmund told her everything. He started with the reviews, the pattern he'd noticed months ago, Margot Sinclair's consistent attacks, always timed with glowing coverage of Voss and Vine, the language that felt coordinated, the strategy that felt personal.
Then the sabotage. Craig Lumley's sudden return, the disastrous service, the way everything had gone wrong in ways that seemed too precise to be a coincidence. And finally, the connection he couldn't prove but felt in his bones. "I'm not saying it's Anthony," Edmund said carefully. "I don't have proof. Maybe I'm paranoid. Maybe I'm just old and seeing conspiracies everywhere." He paused, took a sip of coffee that had gone cold. "But I needed you to know. Whatever happens, whatever you decide, I needed you to know what's been happening. Because this restaurant," he looked around the room at the walls that held 32 years of memories, "this isn't just a business to me. It's your mother. It's our family. It's everything I have left of her." His voice cracked on the last word. Layla had never seen her father cry, not at the funeral, not in all the years since, but now his eyes were wet. "If someone is trying to destroy this place," he said, "I need to understand why. And if it's connected to—" He stopped, couldn't say the name. Layla sat across from her father, looking at the man who'd raised her alone, who'd built his grief into something beautiful, who'd never once asked her to choose between him and the life she'd chosen. Part of her knew, had known for months, maybe years, but knowing and accepting are different things. She reached across the table, took her father's hand, the same hand that had taught her to chop vegetables at age 7, to debone a fish at 12, to trust her palate over any recipe. "I'll talk to him," she said. Edmund nodded, didn't push, didn't demand. "I love you," he said. "Whatever happens, I love you." She drove home in silence. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking on the steering wheel. Found Anthony in the kitchen, sipping wine, scrolling through his phone. Relaxed, unbothered, like nothing in the world was wrong. She told her what her father had said, watched his face carefully for any sign of recognition, any flash of guilt. His reaction was flawless. Shock, outrage, wounded innocence. "Your father has always hated me," he said, setting down his wine glass with deliberate calm. "From day one. This is just his way of poisoning you against me. Can't you see that?" He stood up, walked toward her, took her hands in his. "I know things haven't been perfect between us," he said. "I know I've been stressed, distant, focused on the wrong things." His eyes were wet now, tears that looked almost real. "But this? Paying someone to sabotage his restaurant? Coordinating reviews to destroy his reputation?" He shook his head. "That's insane. That's not who I am." He pulled her closer, pressed her forehead to hers. "I love you," he whispered. "I would never hurt your family. Never." And then the final manipulation. "You want a baby? Let's do it. Right now. This year. I've been selfish, making you wait. You're right. The star can wait. Our family can't." The words she'd been waiting 4 years to hear. The promise she'd given up hoping for. She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to believe him. So she did. They made up, made love, made plans. For 2 weeks, everything felt almost normal, almost hopeful. He came home earlier, drank less, asked about her day like he actually cared about the answer. He even suggested they visit Edmund together, make peace, start fresh. Layla started to think maybe she'd been wrong. Maybe her father had been wrong. Maybe the connection between Anthony and all those terrible things was just coincidence. But the truth doesn't wait for permission. Delia Usman had worked at Voss & Vine for 3 years. She'd emigrated from Ethiopia at 19, worked her way through culinary school on scholarships and overnight shifts, and earned her spot as sous chef through talent and relentless work. She was quiet, observant, the kind of person who noticed everything but said very little. In a kitchen full of ego and chaos, Layla was the one who'd treated her like a human being. She remembered the first week she'd started at Voss & Vine. Nervous, uncertain, still learning the rhythm of an American professional kitchen. One of the line cooks had mocked her accent, laughed when she mispronounced an ingredient, made her feel small in front of the entire staff. Layla had pulled the cook aside after service. Delia never heard what was said, but the cook apologized the next day and never mocked anyone again. Layla was the one who remembered birthdays, who asked about Delia's mother back in Addis Ababa, about the money she sent home each month, about her dreams of one day opening her own restaurant serving Ethiopian cuisine, who made sure the staff got breaks and benefits and basic human dignity in an industry that often forgot such things existed. Delia had seen how Anthony treated Layla, the dismissals, the credit-taking, the subtle cruelties that accumulated like water wearing down stone, the way his charm disappeared behind closed doors. She'd never said anything. It wasn't her place. But when she forgot her jacket at the restaurant one night and drove back to get it, when she pulled into the alley behind Voss and Vine at nearly midnight and saw Anthony's car parked by the back entrance, when she saw him leaning into the window of another woman who was definitely not Layla, she knew she had to speak. She recognized the woman, Margot Sinclair, the disgraced food critic, the one whose career had imploded in spectacular public fashion. Apparently, Anthony hadn't discarded her as completely as everyone thought. Delia sat in her car, heart pounding. Her hands were shaking. Everything in her said to drive away, to mind her own business, to protect herself from the consequences of getting involved. But she thought about Layla, about the woman who defended her when no one else would, about the kindness she'd been shown in a place that valued cruelty. She took out her phone, snapped one photo, just one. Anthony's profile illuminated by the car's interior light, Margot's face turned toward him, the kiss unmistakable. She drove home, didn't sleep, spent the entire night pacing her apartment, arguing with herself about what to do. She could stay quiet, keep her job, pretend she'd never seen anything, or she could tell the truth and possibly lose everything. By morning, she'd made her choice. Some truths are too heavy to carry alone.
Layla was in the office at Voss and Vine when Delia knocked on the door. Her face gave everything away before she even spoke. The nervousness, the guilt, the weight of something she didn't want to say. "Can I come in?" she asked. Layla nodded, closed the laptop, gave Delia her full attention. Delia didn't make a speech, didn't offer comfort or context or explanation, just handed Layla her phone with the photo on the screen. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You deserve to know." Layla looked at the image, Anthony's profile, Margot's face, the kiss. She stared at it for a long time. The seconds stretched into minutes. She didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't throw the phone across the room. She just looked, and something inside her, something that had been holding on by threads for years, finally let go. "When did you take this?" she asked. Her voice was steady, calm, too calm. "Last night, around midnight, behind the restaurant." Layla nodded, handed the phone back to Delia. "Thank you," she said, "for telling me. I know that wasn't easy." Delia's eyes were wet. "I'm so sorry, Layla." Layla stood up, gathered her bag, her keys, her phone. She didn't pack anything else, didn't leave a note, didn't confront Anthony. She just walked out of the office, out of the restaurant, into the bright California sunshine. She got in her car and drove to her father's house. The drive took 40 minutes. She didn't remember most of it, just the steering wheel under her hands, the road unfolding ahead, the strange clarity that comes when everything you thought you knew turns out to be wrong. Edmund was in the kitchen when she arrived, making soup, something simple, something comforting, the way he always did when he was thinking. The same soup her mother used to make, chicken and vegetables and memories. He took one look at her face and turned off the stove.
No questions, no demands for explanation. He didn't ask what happened or what Anthony did or whether she was okay. He just pulled out a chair, poured her a glass of wine, and sat beside her. They stayed like that for hours, father and daughter, silence and presence. The sun went down. The kitchen grew dark. Neither of them moved to turn on the lights. Finally, Layla spoke. "You were right," she said, "about him, about everything." Edmund reached over, took her hand. "I didn't want to be," he said quietly. She told him about the photo, about Margot, about all the pieces finally clicking into place, the late nights, the mysterious phone calls, the receipts she'd found and ignored. She told him about the baby she'd wanted, the promises that were never meant to be kept, the years she'd wasted waiting for a man who would never choose her. And Edmund listened, the way he'd always listened, without judgment, without "I told you so," just steady, patient presence. When she finished, he squeezed her hand. "You're home now," he said. "That's what matters." Layla didn't know it yet, but the worst and the best was still to come. Antony found out she'd left around 10 p.m. He'd been at the restaurant, finishing service, already on his 4th glass of wine. When he got home to an empty apartment, he assumed she was at the gym. When she didn't answer her phone, he assumed she was in the shower. By 11 p.m., confusion had turned to concern. By midnight, concern had turned to suspicion. By 1 a.m., suspicion had become rage. He knew. Somehow he knew. He called Delia. She didn't answer. He called Margot. She said she didn't know anything, but her voice was wrong, nervous, guilty. He called Layla 17 times, straight to voicemail. By 11 p.m., he was drunk. By 11:30, he was in his car. By 11:45, he was pulling up to Kincaid's. Layla heard the crash from upstairs. She'd been in her childhood bedroom, the same room she'd slept in until she was 18, the same room she'd returned to just hours ago, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. The sound of shattering glass pulled her to her feet. She ran downstairs, through the back hallway, toward the dining room, and stopped. Her father stood in the center of the room, perfectly still. Around him, chaos, overturned tables, broken glass, a chair thrown against the wall. And Antony, swaying, drunk, screaming things she'd heard whispered for years but never spoken aloud. "You're nothing. You're a dinosaur. 1 star in 30 years. She watched from the doorway. Her father didn't see her. Antony didn't see her. The staff, frozen in corners, phones raised, didn't see her. She was invisible again, the way she'd been invisible for 4 years. But this time, she chose it. She watched Antony unravel, watched the mask finally slip, watched every lie, every manipulation, every false promise pour out of him in a toxic flood. And she watched her father. Edmund didn't yell, didn't fight back, didn't give Antony the reaction he was begging for. He just stood there, 67 years old, 32 years in this business, absorbing the blows like he'd absorbed every blow life had ever thrown at him, with dignity, with grace, with the quiet strength of a man who knew exactly who he was. When Antony finally paused, chest heaving, voice hoarse, Edmund spoke. "I think you should leave, Antony." Not angry, not threatening, almost gentle. Antony laughed, a desperate, broken sound. "Or what? You'll call the police?" Edmund shook his head. "I'm not going to call anyone. You're going to walk out of here. You're going to sober up, and tomorrow you're going to have to live with what you did tonight. That's punishment enough." For a moment, the room was silent. Then Antony's eyes found Layla in the doorway. Something in his face changed. The rage drained out. What replaced it was worse. Recognition. Understanding. The dawning horror of a man who just destroyed the last chance he'd ever have. "Layla," he said. His voice cracked. "Baby, I'm sorry. I love you. I didn't mean—" She looked at him. The man she'd chosen over her father. The man she'd believed for 4 years. The man who'd promised her a family and given her nothing but excuses. She didn't speak, didn't cry, didn't look away. She just let him see the truth in her eyes. It was over. All of it. He stumbled toward the door. She didn't move, didn't stop him, didn't say goodbye. The door slammed. Silence flooded back. Edmund walked over to a young busboy cowering near the kitchen, the same kid Anthony had nearly knocked down when he'd burst in. He put a hand on the boy's shoulder, asked if he was okay. That was her father. That was who he'd always been. One of the servers, barely 20 years old, stood frozen with his phone still recording. He looked at Edmund, then at Layla, uncertain what to do. Edmund glanced at the phone, then at the young man holding it. "That's yours," he said quietly. "Do what you think is right." He didn't ask for it to be deleted, didn't threaten, didn't beg. The server posted the video to Instagram at 2:47 a.m. By sunrise, it had 2 million views. The headline wrote itself. Celebrity chef Anthony Voss melts down in rival restaurant. Shocking video goes viral. By noon, every food publication in the country had covered it. By evening, it had crossed over into mainstream news. TMZ, CNN, The Today Show, even international outlets picked it up. There was something universally compelling about watching a man destroy himself in real time. The video was brutal. There was no context that could soften it. Just a drunk, raging man destroying a respected restaurant while a dignified elderly chef stood in silence. The contrast was devastating. Edmund, calm, composed, the picture of class under pressure.
Anthony, wild-eyed, slurring, throwing furniture like a child having a tantrum. Social media could not look away. The internet made its judgment instantly. Comments flooded in. Edmund Kincaid is a class act. Anthony Voss is trash. Imagine being so insecure that you attack a 67-year-old man in his own restaurant. The way Edmund just stood there, that's real strength. Anthony Voss is done, finished. Nobody's eating at his restaurant after this. They were right. The first cancellation came at 9 a.m., a corporate event that had booked Voss and Wine for a holiday party. The event coordinator was apologetic but firm. "We can't be associated with this. I'm sure you understand." Then another call. Then another. Then another. By the end of the day, reservations had dropped by 70%. The phone kept ringing, but now it was people canceling, not booking. The charity gala that was scheduled for the following weekend, a major San Francisco society event that would have put Anthony in front of the city's most influential people, canceled their contract. The event chair sent a terse email. "Given recent events, we feel it's best to relocate our function." Suppliers started calling. Nervous conversations about brand alignment, partnership reconsiderations, contract reviews. The premium beef supplier they'd worked with for years, "We need to pause our relationship pending further developments." The specialty produce company, "We're concerned about reputational risk." The artisanal bread bakery, "We just don't think it's a good fit anymore." Sponsors followed. The wine brand that had featured Anthony in their advertising quietly removed his image from their website, scrubbed from existence like he'd never been there. The cookware company canceled their endorsement deal. The food magazine that had been planning a profile killed the story. Within 2 weeks, Voss and Wine was hemorrhaging money. Staff started quitting. Nobody wanted the stain of this restaurant on their resume. The kitchen crew that would once been 50 strong dwindled to a skeleton crew of people who couldn't find work elsewhere. Within a month, Anthony was forced to close the doors. He tried damage control, posted an apology video, carefully scripted, professionally lit, tears that may or may not have been real. He talked about stress, about pressure, about seeking help for his issues. Nobody believed him.
The comments were brutal. Crocodile tears.
apologizing because he got caught, not because he's sorry. This is what happens when you mess with a legend. He disabled comments, deleted the video, disappeared from social media entirely. He sold the restaurant equipment at auction, liquidated what he could, paid off what debts he could manage, which wasn't much. Creditors lined up. Landlords demanded back rent. The empire he'd built was collapsing faster than he could count the losses. 3 months after the video went viral, Anthony Voss left San Francisco. He moved to Reno, opened a small bistro with what remained of his money, a sad, quiet place with fluorescent lighting and a menu that tried too hard to prove he was still relevant. The reviews were mediocre, the customers were sparse. Nobody came to see the disgraced celebrity chef. Nobody cared about his redemption arc. Sometimes tourists would wander in, not knowing who he was. Sometimes locals would come once out of curiosity and never return. He became what he'd always feared, irrelevant, a cautionary tale, a punchline. And somewhere in San Francisco, in a restaurant that had stood for 32 years and would stand for 32 more, Edmund Kincaid was still showing up every morning, still tasting the sauces, still honoring the woman he'd loved. Some legacies are built on ambition, others are built on love. The difference becomes clear eventually. 18 months later, Edmund Kincaid received his second Michelin star. The announcement came on a Tuesday afternoon. Layla was in the office when she got the call, an official notification, formal and brief, confirming what rumor had already suggested. She found her father in the kitchen, tasting a sauce, adjusting the seasoning the way he'd done 1,000,000 times before. She didn't say anything, just handed him her phone with the email on the screen. He read it twice, set down his spoon, looked at her with eyes that were suddenly bright. "Your mother would have loved this," he said. It was the first time she'd seen him cry since the funeral. The headline ran in every food publication. Edmund Kincaid finally gets his second star with his daughter by his side. The article talked about his legacy, his consistency, his refusal to chase trends or compromise his vision. It mentioned the viral video incident only briefly, a footnote in a story about perseverance. They didn't need to dwell on Antony's fall.
The contrast spoke for itself. The celebration was quiet, just the two of them in the restaurant after closing, a bottle of wine open on the bar, the ghost of Lila's mother somehow present in every corner. Edmund raised his glass. He didn't make a speech, didn't summarize the journey, just said, "To your mother." She'd be proud. Layla touched her glass to his. The sound rang through the empty room. She thought about the past 4 years, the choices she'd made, the time she'd lost, the man she'd believed in despite every warning. She thought about the baby she'd wanted, the family she'd imagined, the future that had dissolved like morning fog. She wasn't pregnant, wasn't dating anyone, wasn't in a hurry anymore. For the first time in years, she wasn't waiting for someone else's timeline, wasn't deferring her own life for a man who'd never intended to give her what she needed. She was 34 years old. She had time. She had options. She had herself. And she had her father sitting across from her in the restaurant they'd both built, the restaurant that carried her mother's memory in every dish. That was enough. For now, that was enough. Her phone buzzed, an unknown number. "I saw the news. Congratulations. I'm sorry. For everything." She looked at it for a moment, then deleted it, blocked the number, and set her phone face down on the bar. Some people don't deserve responses. They deserve silence. Edmund noticed her expression. "Everything okay?" She smiled. "Yeah, everything's fine." And for the first time in 4 years, she meant it. She didn't get the life Antony promised her. She got something better. She got her father back. She got herself back. She got a legacy worth protecting and the wisdom to know what really mattered. Anthony Voss spent his nights alone in Reno, serving mediocre pasta to tourists who didn't know his name. The empire he'd chased had crumbled. The star he'd obsessed over had gone to someone else. And Edmund Kincaid, 68 years old, 2 Michelin stars, 33 years in the business, still showed up every morning to taste the sauces, adjust the seasonings, and honor the woman he'd loved. Some legacies are built on ambition. Others are built on love. The difference becomes clear eventually. It always does. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories. See you next time.